Hello, I'm David Cook. With me is my colleague, Chris Gagan. We are specialist accountants and expert witnesses at DRC Forensics Limited, based in Portishead, Bristol, where we deal with a variety of civil and commercial financial disputes, as well as commercial cases or criminal cases. We have considerable experience in producing independent expert reports and giving evidence in court. With our structure, our hourly rates generally are very competitive, especially compared to the national and larger firms. We pride ourselves on our ability to give personal attention to cases and meet deadlines. Today, we're going to give you a fairly quick run through on valuation of businesses in dispute situations, which is something that we handle a lot of. At the present time, we're in a period of significant uncertainty due to the huge impact of COVID-19, which has a major effect on business values. We're going to deal with that by setting out our normal valuation approach, which is how we would commence a valuation at the present time anyway, and then going through how we would deal with and incorporate the effect of the pandemic. Our agenda today is what the accounts don't tell you, bases of valuation, how to obtain the further information necessary to value a business, what you're looking for when you're carrying out a valuation, the art of the valuation, the normal valuation of a trading company, dealing with significant uncertainty such as COVID-19, valuation of shareholding, how to challenge valuations. Summary. Chris.
What the accounts don't tell you. The accounts themselves don't really tell you how a business is constituted or even what it really does. They certainly won't necessarily tell you who owns the business, who exercises control, even in what appears to be a simple situation, for example, 100 ordinary shares, issued, owned 50 each by the two directors. That doesn't tell you the extent to which the directors work in the business or whether either of them exercises control. They don't tell you the current and future financial position. Is it improving or deteriorating? Have there been significant changes, for example, major contracts gained or lost? Is there dependence on one or two large customers? And how stable is the client base? What is the real value of the assets, in particular property and goodwill, but also to an extent liabilities, especially if uncertain, for examples, whether a claims against the company? David.
Basis of valuation. We are normally valuing in a dispute situation. That may be a minority shareholder dispute, 50% shareholders falling out, disagreement within a group, a partnership dispute, something that's caused damage to or loss of the business, a matrimonial dispute, or a professional negligence claim. You'll need to know the reason for the valuation, the nature of the dispute, or why there is contention. It may be the death of a shareholder requires independent valuation. You need to be clear on what is being valued, whether it's the whole company, a particular class of shares, or a specific shareholding. The date of the valuation is important at any time, even more so in today's climate, as you'll hear later. That affects the information that will be available to you. So, if you were doing a valuation at 31st December 19, there would be no point in having regard to the accounts to 31st December 2020 or subsequent events, as they are irrelevant. This, of course, is particularly important in considering whether and to what extent COVID-19 has an impact. The difference between a valuation at a date in, say, 2018 as against currently is likely to be very significant. The reason for the valuation and the date of it both affect the information that would be available to you for valuation. For instance, far less information would normally be available to a non-director minority shareholder than to a majority controlling shareholder director. Be clear on who you're acting for and exactly what your instructions are. If you aren't, it's all downhill from there. Chris.
So, How to obtain the other information necessary to value a company. The articles of association and annual return, if not provided, can be obtained from Companies House and give a lot of useful information. Shareholders' agreements, if relevant, should be available to you. Always ask for them. It's surprising how often these are not readily provided, or that people are not aware of them or their significance. The availability of management accounts, budgets and forecasts will depend on the nature of the dispute and are less likely to be provided in a minority situation than in a control situation. Professional valuations can be important, and this may be of assets such as freehold property or a previous valuation of the company. Here, you have to take into account the date, the purpose for which it was done, and what was actually valued. Previous share transfers are a useful guide to the value at which shares have changed hands, although again, you do need to have regard to the circumstances of the transfer. You need to make inquiry. You'll be acting for someone who will have some or a great deal of knowledge on the position. Ask, and if necessary, ask the other side. Even if it appears that you may not be entitled to the information, you just never know. David.
What you're looking for. Depending on the basis of the valuation, you will be looking at the different share classes and their rights, in particular, voting, dividend and repayment of capital rights. You need to remember that in some cases or circumstances change. For example, preference shares may normally carry no votes, but take voting rights and even control if dividends are in arrears. You may also have conversion rights on preference shares or loan stock, and the circumstances in which those can be exercised and the effect of that need to be taken into account. Preemption rights are often important in private companies, both in respect of unissued shares and the transfer of issued shares. This can have a significant effect on value. The articles or shareholders' agreements can often specify a basis of valuation which may be beneficial or otherwise for shareholder. For example, it's quite common to have a provision where shareholdings will be valued at a percentage of the value of the company with no discount for a minority interest. Equally, I have seen provisions where, on a shareholder leaving the company, their shares must be valued at par. In other cases, I've seen provisions as to how a company will be valued, such as net assets, as shown in the last audited accounts. On this basis, with the addition of goodwill based on a multiple net profits. You must be very clear as to what, if anything, is specified in the company you are valuing. The question of control, who has it and how it's exercised, are normally very important in considering valuation for shareholding. Control is not always obvious and sometimes is deliberately hidden. It's very easy to overlook the fact that Table A of the Companies Act gives a casting vote to the chairman on an equality of votes. This automatically implies, unless it is excluded, and in a 50-50 sharing situation, gives control to the chairman, and can also in a 4 by 25% situation, especially if you're dealing with husband and wife shareholders. If you bear in mind the strategic considerations, for example, a 10% holding will be worth more to a 45% holder than to another 10% holder. And this also applies the other way around, especially when someone is transferring a holding that loses that control. The latter is particularly important in relation to valuations for tax purposes. Chris.
Now to the art of the valuation. Valuation is more art than science and is to quite an extent a matter of opinion. There are no rigid guidelines, although there are plenty of norms and ranges to apply. A history of dividend payment is a factor, particularly in relation to small minority shareholdings. A shareholding that regularly receives a dividend is going to be worth more than one which doesn't. The assets basis is normally used for valuing property or investment companies, but is also a factor in valuing a trading operation. In general, a company with more net assets will be worth more than one with less, where they have similar profits. This must, however, be tempered with the fact that it is not beneficial to have more money tied up for the same return, and much will depend upon the nature, use, and realizability of the assets. The earnings basis using post-tax profits is the normal means of valuing trading operations, with, as I have said, some regard to the asset cover. Sometimes with small businesses, this is based on pre-tax profits, often surprisingly without any charge for the proprietors, or in some cases on turnover. But the norm is post-tax profits after realistic directors' remuneration. Enterprise value will sometimes be used. This is very similar to the earnings basis, but uses EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. This is normally used where there are institutional investors involved with loans as well as equity. Discounted cash flow is normally applied to valuing intangible assets, particularly brand names, patent rights, and goodwill, but is also used in valuing relatively new enterprises that have not yet achieved profit. Again, the rate of return or interest is a subjective factor. All methods of valuation include subjective factors such as rates of return, adjustments to profits, price earnings multiples, and asset values, which is where disagreements can easily arise. So in valuing a profitable trading company, we would normally be looking at the earnings basis and assessing the viability and trend of the business, the marketplace, the strength of the customers and the suppliers, and degree of dependence on these and any significant changes. We'll be looking to arrive at maintainable profits. In addition to the points mentioned above, we will be looking to adjust profits to a realistic position, looking at things like rent, intercompany and management charges, and directors' remuneration to reflect a proper cost for managing and operating a company on a commercial basis. In private companies, the level of such items charged in the accounts, particularly directors' remuneration, does not necessarily mean anything in relation to responsibility or hours worked. It's usual to look at the profits for at least the last 3 years and possibly 5, and apply a weighting of say 3-1 in favour of the latest year. This would be varied depending on the profit trends and the strength or weakness of the company. You may also be considering up-to-date management accounts, budgets, and forecasts. You need to bear in mind that if you're dealing with any accounting periods of longer or shorter than a year, that there may be a significant seasonal effect on the results. We once saw a valuation where the last accounts were for a 15-month period and pro rata showed profits substantially higher than previous years. The valuer had overlooked the fact that this contained 2 Christmas periods, which greatly distorted the results. David.
Valuation of a trading company. Having arrived at a maintainable profit figure, you are then looking for a relevant price-earnings ratio to apply. This is often done by looking for a comparable quoted company in a similar market or sector and taking a realistic average. Let's say, for today's purposes, that the average PE for similar quoted companies is 15. You'll be then looking to discount this for the lack of marketability and other factors as against a quoted company. An average discount for a private company would be 40% to 60%, increased or decreased depending on the relative size, strengths or weaknesses of this company or sector. I would also then be looking at trade statistics to see what the actual PEs paid for private companies have been and how that would compare. However, care does need to be taken on this, as what is often reported is based on the price of the deal against the company's reported profits, and there are often unknown deal factors to take into account. A simple example is that you may have a company with reported post-tax profits of 500,000, which was sold for 5 million, and therefore an apparent PE of 10. However, directors' remuneration was in excess of a par commercial rate, so the true maintainable profits were 625,000 as far as the purchasers were concerned, an actual PE of 8. In the example I quoted just now, with a quoted PE of 15 discounted by 50%, this would give you a PE of, say, 7.5 to apply to your maintainable profits post-tax. So if the maintainable profits you arrived at were 250,000 pre-tax, say 200,000 post-tax, this would give you a value of 1.5 million for the whole company. You would then have some regard to the net asset position and whether this increased or decreased the value. Cash, surplus to a company's ongoing requirements, especially where there are distributable reserves, will usually give an increase in value. Dealing with significant uncertainty, such as COVID-19. The precise date of evaluation is currently more important than ever. If it is in 2019 or early 2020, then COVID-19 should be disregarded, as you cannot and should not use hindsight when valuing. With any valuation from March 2020 on, it will be a very material factor. Dealing with evaluation at any time of significant uncertainty is difficult, but the current situation is the most difficult and uncertain that I have ever encountered. There is considerable market unrest and volatility, stock market changes, with generally reductions in P's and multiples, past performance having a lot less relevance, companies, even sometimes in the same or similar sectors, being affected differently, future prospects being very uncertain, and there is a real risk of total loss. A minority of businesses have been doing well. For instance, Zoom's business has zoomed. There is considerable M&A activity in the market, but buyers, especially cash buyers, are very cautious. They're in a strong position and are looking for bargains. There is also a greater emphasis than usual on deferred consideration. In that situation, valuers, whether it's of commercial property or a business, would much prefer to give a range of values, but have to appreciate that the situation of the court may require a specific figure. You can therefore expect a valuer in the current position to give a material uncertainty declaration on the following lines. The outbreak of the novel coronavirus COVID-19, declared by the World Health Organization as a global pandemic on 11th of March 2020, has impacted global financial markets. Travel restrictions have been implemented by many countries. Market activity is being impacted in many sectors. As at the valuation date, I consider that we can attach less weight to previous market evidence for comparison purposes and to inform opinions of value. Indeed, the current response to COVID-19 means that I am faced with an unprecedented set of circumstances on which to base a judgment. My valuation is therefore reported on the basis of material valuation uncertainty. Consequently, less certainty and a higher degree of caution should be attached to my valuation than would normally be the case. Given the unknown future impact that COVID-19 might have on the business market, I recommend that you keep the valuation of this business under frequent review. So, in considering a valuation at the present time, having arrived at a normal valuation based on past performance, I would now be looking at, in detail, the current trading and financial position of the business, as well as its future prospects, with specific emphasis on the following: the current trading and financial position of the business and the sector that it's in, the cash position and cash flow forecasts, liquidity, working capital, risk of liquidation, future prospects and a potential effect of ongoing uncertainty, stability of major customers and the customer base, stock and debtor levels, and whether these are increasing out of proportion, their value and collectability. Are creditors being paid or increasing? Are there problems on liquidity and on further supplies? whether dividends are still being paid, the risk of total loss. And we'll be looking at alternative bases of valuation from the normal basis set out in the previous section to use in conjunction with that, and will be considering on a very cautious basis acquisition demand in the sector, recent arm's length transactions in the sector, with as many examples as possible, alternative methods such as discounted cash flow, net asset value, bearing in mind that generally there are a lot of assets available and values generally are down, both in the market and on liquidation. Then discount rates and risk, taking care to not in effect discount twice on the rates and the figures. A valuer will be looking to use more than one valuation approach, and where possible to triangulate their approach. Care must be taken to show and demonstrate how the conclusion of the value based on those multiple approaches or methods is reasonable, and the process of analysing and reconciling the different values into a single conclusion without averaging should be clearly set out, and how the overall resulting value has been arrived at. Chris.
So now for valuation of a shareholding. Having established a value for the company as a whole, if you're valuing a specific shareholding, you have to take into account all the factors mentioned previously, such as the size of the holding, who exercises control, the rights of the shares, whether there is an influential minority, for example, a 25% holder can block special resolutions, or whether there is an uninfluential minority. You then have to look at the appropriate discount to apply. In general, a discount can apply to any level of holding that is not 100%. A general range of discounts to apply would be as follows. For a shareholding of between 75 and 100%, the discount could be from 0 to 5%. For a shareholding of 50%, the discount could be 20 to 25%. And for a minority shareholding of between 1 to 24%, the discount could be anywhere from 50 to 95%. So with a company valued at £3 million, for a 20% holding, pro rata, that would be 600,000, but this would be discounted by 60%, say to 240,000. David.
How to challenge valuations. Is the what, why, and when of the valuation correct? And has the correct information been used as a result of that? Is the valuer truly independent? Or are they in some way connected with any of the parties? Unless you're dealing with a situation where the articles or agreements specify that the valuation should be by the company's auditors or accountants, then they would never be seen as independent and should not be used in dispute situations. Nowadays, an auditor should not normally undertake the valuation of a client company in a dispute situation. Has account been taken of industry norms, which may specifically apply in the case of this valuation? Have there been previous deals or share transactions, and have they been taken into account and considered? Ask your corporate colleagues, particularly your company commercial colleagues, because they can often give you relevant information on actual transactions that have taken place. Ask an industry expert. Inquire as to whether there is anyone within your organization who has expertise or specific knowledge of the area of type of business that you're dealing with. Remember that you're looking for the smoking gun. In other words, the fact or factors that will destroy the credibility of the expert or the basis of his valuation. You need to make sure that all the relevant steps have been taken and all the relevant information correctly applied. It's easy for people to make mistakes. I once saw a valuation where an average listed PE of 15 had been arrived at, which had been discounted by 40% to arrive at a PE of 9 for a private company. But in doing the calculation against the maintainable profits figure arrived at, the original figure of 15 had been used and nobody had noticed. The person doing the valuation had clearly followed someone else's formula and not properly understood or thought through what they were doing. Chris.
As we have said, valuation of businesses is an art, not a science. And at the present time, it is much more difficult to lay down precise rules or parameters, and the individual factors applying to each situation are even more important. Who knows what the future holds and how different sectors will fare? As David said at the beginning, we deal with a wide variety of cases, both commercial and criminal. In a number of cases as a party expert or single joint expert, where we produce independent expert reports and where necessary give evidence in court, as we quite often do, especially in criminal cases. We have also handled a number of expert determinations on company valuations, in some cases referred through the Institute of Chartered Accountants, ICAEW. We have had several valuation disputes, including the valuation of a group of 5 companies, 3 operating in the UK and 2 in the USA. This was further complicated as the valuation was required on 3 different bases: an open market, sale as a going concern, gradual wind down and sale over a year, and immediate liquidation. We also had to take into account the effects of Brexit and COVID-19. Another recent case was the valuation of a company where the parties had differing views on specific points in the shareholders' agreement, including the date of the valuation, which could have brought into play the effect of COVID-19, as well as particular special rights on shares. It did look as though we were going to have to take full legal advice on the position, but a little to our surprise, on our setting out the ways in which we could proceed with our views on the position on the specific issues, we were able to get all parties' solicitors' agreement. We were then able to proceed and issue our determination on the share value.
I will say that we all know why accountants were put on this earth, and that is to make solicitors look good. We forensic accountants certainly do that, in our case by doing a very effective job. We are not auditors. We think outside the box. As they say, why did the accountant cross the road? Because he was an auditor. So he looked in the file, and that's what they did last year, not us. Thank you all for your attention. Just to say that if you have any case that you would like to discuss with us, we're happy to give a free consultation. If it's of any interest to you, we will happily give this presentation to your colleagues in your office, COVID-19 permitting.